All right, I have been very busy this summer, but there's a video I've been thinking about for a long time, and it came up again when I was listening to Gabe Eichert and Teddy Lehman, two Sooner greats, former football players. They have a podcast where they talk about different football things, and this came up on one of their episodes, and it's been a long time ago, and it's just taken me this long to get through uh, all of the different requirements, all the different obligations of summer to get around to talking about this. But what it was, they got a question from a fan listener, and it was basically about transitioning the OU players into new offensive and defensive schemes. And the question was like, why did there have to be a learning period for new terminology? Why could the coaches not just come in and use the terminology that was in place? Or why didn't everyone just have the same terminology? Something like that. And so they go into a bit of an explanation about how different the terminology is depending on where you play. Um, so uh, I've heard two jokes about this. So one of them is that in this situation, when you ask 10 coaches what you're going to call something, you're liable to get 11 different answers. So which is completely true, depending on uh, the different number of systems that they've been exposed to. And then, like I always tell people whenever the football terminology comes up, that football is the Tower of Babel. Like, it is just a fallen humanity with this scattered and confusing um, number of different terms. And so I wanted to kind of go over it and offer some examples of sort of why it is the way it is, and sort of like how it is. So I guess I'm going to give some examples that sort of show the kind of variance and density in uh, uh, the terminology that you'll be exposed to if you follow the sport or you play, definitely if you play in the sport, and also a little bit of explanation of how it got that way. So one of the first ones that whenever I'm sort of sharing this insight with people is I talk about sail. So sail is a passing concept that involves three receivers, and it's usually a three-level stretch on the outside. So this is the outside corner over here. And what happens is the number one receiver runs down the field. The number two receiver runs something that looks like a corner, and the number three receiver runs to the flat. And as you can see, it looks kind of like a sail, right? It's a little sailboat here. Now, that is where the name came from. And if you look in a lot of, so I found this in some older West Coast offense playbooks, where the routes that are run by a tight end have a different name than the routes that are run by a wide receiver. So, for example, if we have a wide receiver out here and they run this pattern towards the deep pattern on the angle towards the outside of the field, it will typically be called corner. You're running towards the corner of the end zone, or it'll sometimes be called a flag, because before there were pylons, the little orange pylons, the edge of the or sort of the boundaries of the end zone were marked by orange flags, and so they'll be called a flag. If this exact same route is run by a tight end, it's called sail, right? And that is not the only place where, if you look through some of these older playbooks, you'll see this. So this route where we just break to the outside, is typically called an out. But if it's run by a tight end, it's called something like a bench route, right? And so in these older West Coast style playbooks where I have seen this type of stuff, so you've got, we're running a fade or go. A lot of times they'll just be marked as an alert. They don't actually expect to be able to pass to this outside receiver unless there's some kind of tremendous breakdown. And then you'll have a tight end that's running this, and they'll sail, right? And then your running back is running a swing or a flat. And because of this sort of triangular sail shape, the entire concept got called sail, and this route got called a sail. So we already have a couple of layers of depth on what sail is. It was the name of the tight end's route, but at the same time, the most common route, or the concept that was the most common time that they would run that route, was also called sail. And then sail changed. So if you look at some more modern playbooks, one of the features that you'll see is, first of all, the routes are named more consistently. But what happens is when someone's running sail, this pattern looks more like this, right? Or sometimes it'll even look like this, and we've got like a little trident poking out there. And what happened is, if we look at this concept, so the way it's built, it's a 3-level stretch on the outside. So this outside receiver is going to run deep. They're attacking the deepest part of the offense. This inside receiver is still running deep, but because they're further inside and they're running an in-breaking route, they're a second level inside there. And then, of course, we have the back swinging out for, it's usually back. It could also be a wide receiver. But the third receiver running to the flat to create this third level. So you get 3 wide receivers all in this one little zone over here, and you're trying to stretch all the levels. So even if you have something like cover 2, you're only going to end up with 2 defenders in this zone for 3 wide receivers, which is another example of where you get a little bit of the mixture of terminology, because sometimes people will call this flood, because that's what you're doing, is you're flooding a zone. And it's one of the best examples of where you just put a bunch of receivers in a zone where there's usually not enough defenders to cover it. And what happened is we can already kind of see it by the drawing, is that it creates a bit of a conflict up here in the high spot between these 2 routes. And so what coaches started doing is they started flattening this out a little bit more. And then as it became a route, kind of became its own route that any receiver could run. It basically became a version of a deep out route. So where your normal out might be run at 10, this is more like at 15, the sail. And they want to give the receiver the option to break in on any of these angles to deal with any traffic. So this wide receiver is going up, this receiver goes up, and when they start breaking in, they have the option to flatten out that route or even come back a little bit to avoid any traffic in this area, whether it be from their own wide receiver and a safety or a corner coming into that area. It's sort of like a traffic management system. And so even though it started out as the name of, it's still commonly used as the name of this concept where we have an outside and some kind of in and a flat. So that's sail. Sail is also, if you look at the old school playbooks, is just a tight end running in corner. And in a lot of the newer stuff, sail is any wide receiver running a deep out, often having the options to break it to the corner or flatter to the out, or even coming back towards the line of scrimmage as they break outside. And so that is one of the ways and one of the examples of how football terminology creates a Tower of Babel effect. Like, there's just tons and tons of terminology, and people aren't a lot of times they aren't using the same terminology, not even on the same team. And this is one of my favorite examples, where you will have individuals on the same team that aren't even calling similar concepts by the same names. And the best way to explain this is if you've seen smash route. So smash is very common. So outside receiver runs a hitch, and the inside receiver runs a corner. And they're trying to create a stretch on a defensive back, like a corner over here. And so pretty much the entire football world recognizes this as smash. You'll even hear it on broadcast now. It's gotten out that much where it used to be less common to actually hear the concept described in so much detail. So pretty much the whole world describes that as smash. And I have been standing by in conversations where I've heard offensive coaches talk to their quarterback, and they're referring to what the quarterback should be doing when they run smash. However, if you were to just walk around and listen whenever the team was on the field during a game, you would never hear the word smash. It was not a play call. It was not in the playbook. To actually run this play, they called 61 or 71. This was the one route, right? So in their route tree, this is a 1. And so it was a lower level team. They didn't have a very complicated route tree. And so 61 was you run smash to the right. 71 is you run smash to the left. And so you would call 61 and 71. And that was the play call for a concept that everybody knew as smash. And if you walked around and listened to them, they would actually call it smash. That's how they knew it. But it didn't have a play call. A lot of you might see it because the corner is sometimes a 7. So routes that break to the outside are odd routes usually, and routes that break to the inside are even. And so you might see this in a similar system where someone's calling that like a 17, but they're not even going to use the word of smash. On that same team, the defensive side of the football never called this smash. They had a completely different terminology for it. And it's very common if you look around on the internet, this is something you'll run into. They call this China. And it's based on a call because of the stress that this particular route combination puts on the defensive backfield. It's very common where anytime this cornerback sees the number 1 wide receiver stop short in front of them, they are trained to shout out China, 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 and the defense will make some kind of adaptation based on that China call. And it varies. That may mean that the cornerback's giving up their short responsibility and they're charging deep to cut something off in the corner, and somebody else is supposed to come cover that short wide receiver. Or it may mean that the corner is staying short, and if there's someone over here in this area by the number 2 receiver, they can't pass them off. They have to help carry him to the corner to help out this safety, because the safety is going to have a problem with leverage. They have to help out that safety because the cornerback is staying short. Um, Whatever it means to the particular defensive scheme, they call it something different. So it's entirely possible for this one simple route combination, the simple concept that everyone understands, they'll talk about it as smash, but whenever they actually play call it, it won't be called smash. And if you talk to the defense, whenever they're trying to decipher what happens when the other team runs it, they call it China. And so you can have on a single team, the personnel are not even calling the concepts the same thing. And the reason that it happens that way is because they each need them to do different things. And a lot of times there's not required crossover between offense and defense. So if they're calling them different names, and the complexities of play calling sometimes mean things are numbered instead of calling it out by name. And you can end up in that situation. A lot of times it also has to do with your ability to say it clearly in a football situation and have it heard by the other players on the field. So let me do it this way so that they're actually left and right on the... So this is very common. You'll hear the terms Rip and Liz, and they are simply a short translation for right and left. And in a lot of ways, these two terms are genius, and they get used for everything. Coaches use them for formation calls and for coverage checks and for just everything that you can imagine. Because the first sound of the first letter tells you where you need to be going, left or right. And it is shorter, it is punchier, and it is more compact than having to say out the entire word. And this is a thing that is important, and if you've been around a lot, because these ending sounds are so different, it is difficult for people to confuse them whenever you hear them on the field and there's a lot of stuff going on. And so if you ever get a chance to get out on the field and somebody's using these schemes, you'll hear them yelling out rip, 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 or Liz, Liz, Liz. They're making a call, or they'll say to someone else, they'll be like, hey, you're dropping, hey, you're rip, something like that. But it comes through very clear because you get the first sound to sort of give you all the information. And this, because the ending sounds are different, because they don't rhyme. Sometimes it's easy to confuse rhyming sounds because they're so similar. But because these are different, it makes it an extremely effective way to sort of communicate right or left, and teams use them all over the place for all kinds of different calls. So that is a little bit of sort of a treatise on, like I say, the Tower of Babel of football, sort of examples of different terminology and kind of the ways that they ended up there. And I think one of the important questions, one of the important answers whenever people ask about terminology is in a lot of ways the terminology is much more important for the coaches than it is for the players. Because it certainly has to be clear in the player's mind for them to execute it correctly on the field. If the coaches don't have clarity, though, it becomes really difficult for them to teach their players up to a level where the player's going to be able to use it effectively. So the coaches bring in the terminology that they're comfortable with, that they're familiar with. A lot of times these systems are built with all kinds of mnemonics and other learning schemes so that you can try and remember things. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're built with just a lot of rote memorization, and you just kind of have to sit there and you have to know that Seahawk means whatever Seahawk means, you know. But those systems are built with a certain intent behind them, and the coaches bring their terminology with them because if they don't understand the systems, there's really no way that they're going to be able to effectively pass it down to their players. And so it does. It puts the burden on the players to have to learn new terminology, and there can be a lot of new terminology. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. Please excuse the raspy voice. I got caught a little bit of a summer cold, and I hope y'all keep enjoying these.